Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Tonight, in an in-depth interview, I speak to Theresa May, the leader of the Conservative Party, about her early life.
I was an only child, so of course I didn't have brothers and sisters who I was playing with, and sometimes had to just go out and do things on my own.
Her strategy for Brexit, her record in office, and the controversies over her manifesto.
You are also now cutting free school lunches for infants, means testing the winter fuel allowance for pensioners, ending the triple lock. The social care funding system has been called by some the dementia tax. Some people might ask whether the nasty party, the phrase that you used, might be back.
Not at all. What I'm doing in the manifesto and in the policies we're putting forward is addressing some of the key challenges that face this country.
And in a further interview recorded hours before the recent attack on the capital, how she hopes to tackle terrorism.
Isn't the reality that our security services, whatever funding you have provided to them, are simply overwhelmed?
No, the security services do an excellent job for us. They are working tirelessly to ensure that we can identify people who are of concern.
Good evening and welcome to the Tonight programme. With just 2 days to go before we head to the polls in the snap election she called, tonight we speak to the leader of the Conservative Party, Theresa May, about her policies, her vision for Britain, and speaking after the Manchester bombing but before the latest terror attack in London, how would she keep us all safe?
Very good to see you.
Very good to see you.
Thank you.
It's crunch time for Theresa May. This Thursday, she'll find out if the snap general election she called was worth the risk. But who is the woman hoping to lead Britain into a new era post-Brexit?
She's not a gimmick politician. She's absolutely what you see. You get what you see with Theresa, and I think that's why people trust her.
Born Theresa Brazier, she was raised in the comfortable middle-class village of Wheatley in Oxfordshire. Daughter of a vicar and an only child, she spent much of her early life in this church, listening to her father's sermons. A quiet and reserved child, she did have a passion for cooking and cricket. Aged 13, May went to a local grammar school for girls where she was a model student and moved up a year.
She was very, very studious, very conscientious. She would get quite exasperated when the history teacher went off at a tangent. She wanted to get back on track with what we were meant to be discussing.
It was their history teacher that pitted Rosalind and Theresa against each other in the school's mock general election.
Theresa stood for the Conservative Party. I stood for the Liberal Party. And the outcome of that was that I was chosen to be the school's Prime Minister, and Theresa came second. She was very quiet, reserved. She had got a sense of humour, and she had got a lot of feisty characteristics about her. She wasn't charismatic.
Beaten but undeterred, May would set her sights high. And in 1974, she won herself a place at Oxford University to read geography. At Oxford, she formed a close network of friends, some of whom would become future Tory ministers.
We were all part of that sort of political set, and it was a very exciting time because Labour was absolutely falling to bits. We had the rise of conservative thought, and I think that will have shaped a lot of our thinking as a generation.
May was also capable of letting her hair down.
We'd been to an operetta together, and it was very funny. And I went back to my room, and about 5 minutes later, Theresa burst in the door singing one of the arias from the opera. And, you know, it was just larky about. And my boyfriend was in the room too, and he was not amused.
It was at a conservative disco in her final year that May would meet her future husband and love of her life, Philip.
What were you dancing to?
Probably ABBA. Come on, it must have been ABBA. It was the 1970s.
The Christmas ball would follow.
And what was, do you remember how she was dressed?
Something floaty, I think, actually, wasn't it?
It was the age of floaty.
It was the age of floaty.
Yes.
Philip would soon become head of the prestigious Oxford Union.
Philip was my sort of competitor, if you like, in the Oxford Union. Both were very capable, very much liked, and actually very, very good together.
After 3 years at university, Theresa May would land herself a job at the Bank of England, despite lacking a degree in economics.
She was one of the best research assistants that I ever had during my 17 years at the bank. And she picked up things with remarkable facility.
In 1981, May's life was struck by tragedy. She lost both her parents within the space of a year. Her father died in a car crash, her mother from multiple sclerosis.
Theresa didn't tell people. You know, it was very private. And she did eventually say about it, but I think she kept it in.
May would continue to work in the city for 20 years. In the early 90s, she would fulfill a lifelong ambition and run for Parliament. And the vicar's daughter would eventually make it to the highest office there is.
So, Prime Minister, what sort of child were you? How would you describe yourself? Because, of course, every time you read an article about the Prime Minister, it always has the line, the vicar's daughter. How would you describe yourself as a child?
Well, of course, you can't get away from the fact that I was a vicar's daughter. I was quite sort of bookish as a child. I enjoyed going to school. I enjoyed reading books. I enjoyed learning. I was an only child, so of course I didn't have brothers and sisters who I was playing with, and sometimes had to just go out and do things on my own.
And occupy yourself?
Occupy myself, yes.
What's the naughtiest thing you ever did?
Oh, goodness me. Well, I suppose that... gosh, do you know, I'm not quite sure.
Well, there must have been a moment.
Nobody's ever perfectly behaved, are they? I mean, you know, I have to confess, when me and my friends sort of used to run through the fields of wheat, the farmers weren't too pleased about that.
So you'd be wrecking fields near the vicarage. That was not the naughtiest thing you ever did, Prime Minister.
Well, I can't.
Goodness, what a record. It's an incredibly close-knit family, obviously very closely built around the church where your father was a vicar. And you used to pray together as a family in that church. Just describe those moments, because they must have been extraordinarily intimate.
Yes, I mean, really important moments in terms of us as a family, I think, but hugely impressive in the sense of the family coming together for those few moments in a very quiet space of the church when everybody else had left the church.
You lost both of your parents in very quick succession after an horrendous car accident, and then your mother who was suffering from MS. How on earth did you cope with that? You were orphaned in your early 20s.
Well, it was a tremendous shock, particularly when my father died following a car crash, as you say.
It must have been devastating.
It was, well, I mean, for anybody, there will be people watching this who will be in similar circumstances of having lost both their parents at a relatively early age. And it is quite, it is a shock. And of course, as I say, without brothers or sisters to share that with. But that's why it was so good to have Philip.
Let's talk about the overarching issue around this election, that is, of course, Brexit. What do you think of Nigel Farage?
Well, to be perfectly honest, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about him. What I think about is the issue and getting on with the job of delivering on Brexit.
But he's a man who changed the course of British politics.
A lot of people were involved in the work that led to the decision that British people took in relation to the EU referendum. What changed the face of British politics was the millions of people who went out and voted to leave the European Union.
Would you be prepared to pay into the EU budget to get a free trade deal?
Well, I've said that there may be some parts of the European Union programmes that we want to continue to be members of.
Yes, you've said that in the manifesto.
Make some sort of, yes, put some payments in. Over and above that, we will consider the rights and obligations that we have had as a member of the European Union and come to a fair settlement.
But that's not quite what I asked.
What people voted for was to ensure that we weren't sending vast sums of money every year into the European Union.
But what I'm asking is whether you think it might be an idea to pay into the budget to get a free trade deal.
I don't think it will be necessary. I think that we will be able to get a good free trade deal with the European Union for this reason, because this isn't just about what benefits the UK, it's about what benefits the European Union as well.
So you won't rule it out?
Well, I think we're going to get a good deal without having to go down that road.
Theresa May cut her teeth in politics as a Conservative councillor in the late 80s. She made her first bid for Parliament in 1992 in northwest Durham, coming second to Labour but ahead of a young Tim Farron. It was in 1997 that she would make her breakthrough.
I haven't got an office yet, so I'm waiting to hear where that office might be.
Once elected, May would make her name as a hard-working and opinionated politician. It was her belief in 2002 that the Conservative Party needed a makeover if it was to have any chance of beating Blair's new Labour.
You know what some people call us? The nasty party.
It was a brave speech to do, and it marked the moment that the Tory party began to take itself seriously as a possible party of government again, because it was a clear exposition of what people thought.
It identified Theresa May as a party moderniser. And in 2010, she would be rewarded by David Cameron with the role of Home Secretary in the coalition government, one of the toughest cabinet positions.
I was surprised that Theresa May had had this enormous promotion, and I was quietly suspecting that she might face the same fate as many other Home Secretaries. I remember her sitting there nervously, constantly glancing down at her notes, probably feeling rather insecure as a new Home Secretary.
May threw herself into the role. She was the longest-serving Home Secretary of modern times. Her bid to reform the police showed her resolve.
If you do not change of your own accord, we will impose change on you.
There were significant struggles along the way. During May's tenure, immigration would become a defining issue.
We aim to reduce net migration from the hundreds of thousands to the tens of thousands by the end of this Parliament.
A highly controversial campaign was dropped.
I think politicians should be willing to step up to the plate and say when they think something actually hasn't been as good an idea, and I think they were too blunt an instrument.
And in her last 3 years as Home Secretary, immigration of non-EU migrants actually increased.
You can't really say she was an enormous success in policy terms, but in political terms, she weathered the storm as the Home Office very well.
The Brexit result last year altered the nation's course and was a chance for May to seize the moment. Her first speech as leader revealed her intentions to broaden the party's horizons.
We will make Britain a country that works not for a privileged few, but for every one of us.
She would make dramatic cabinet changes.
I think getting rid of some people had a smack of vengeance to it. There was a sense that Mrs. May had encountered a few enemies along the way, had a few bruising battles in cabinet during the Cameron years, and was settling a few scores.
With Brexit around the corner, May called a snapped general election, she said, in the hope of bolstering her hand ahead of negotiations. Some believe it was a gamble based on her previous lead in the polls. But in recent weeks, that lead has narrowed. Some critics describing her style at times as robotic. She's been accused by some of bringing back the nasty party and was challenged on disability benefits.
I want my disability living allowance to come back.
And in the days following our interview, her Her manifesto launch came under fire after she appeared to U-turn on her so-called dementia tax.
Isn't this U-turn really just a cynical attempt to stop voters leaving you in droves?
Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. We will consult on how the system operates, and we will do that through a green paper.
This has been the most shambolic manifesto launch that I can remember. Not since Labour's suicide note of 1983 has a manifesto done more to cheer the other side. It was a debacle. It was an embarrassing debacle.
So to what extent can Theresa May brush aside recent wobbles?
She's come up with various messages. She's changing the nature of her premiership, and in a kind of rather confusing way, because I'm not quite sure voters at the end were as sure as they were at the beginning of who Theresa May is and why they should vote for her.
In the introduction to your manifesto, you say, "We abhor social division, injustice, unfairness and inequality." How do you balance that with the fact that you are also now cutting free school lunches for infants, means testing the winter fuel allowance for pensioners, ending the triple lock? The social care funding system has been called by some the dementia tax. Some people might ask whether the nasty party, the phrase that you used, might be back. What's your response to that?
Not at all. What I'm doing in the manifesto and in the policies we're putting forward is addressing some of the key challenges that face this country over the next 5 years, but not just the next 5 years, beyond that time. And you mentioned the social care issue. The figures show that in just 10 years' time, there will be 2 million more people aged over 75 in this country. Now, the system we've got at the moment simply won't be able to cope with that.
Let's have a look at the schools funding, a pledge in the manifesto to give schools an extra $4 billion over the next 5 years. The IFS has said that rather than protecting school budgets, this amounts to a 3% cut in real terms per pupil because of rising costs and rapidly increasing pupil numbers. What would you say to them?
We are already putting record funding into our schools, and we will increase that funding and to further record levels over the course of the Parliament. But the issue, Julie, often people look at the question about schools, and as I say, we're putting record levels of funding into our schools, and we want to introduce a fairer system of distributing that money across the country. But what we do see in our schools, the quality of education, is not just about the funding that goes in, it's about making sure that every child has a good school place.
OK, so you're defending the money that's going in, but you're paying for that increase by cancelling the free school meals for infants. Now, in a family with a 5 and a 7-year-old, that is potentially asking them to pay up to £1,000 a year extra now on top of their normal household bills to cover the cost of their children's school meals.
Now, what we're doing with the free school meals is we're saying, yes, we will continue to ensure that those children who are most in need carry on getting those free school lunches. But we are also going to introduce free school breakfasts for every primary school child. So for children from the poorest families...
But it's the cost of those school meals. For those families who may not be quite on that level where they qualify for a free school meal, but who are just about managing, they're now trying to accommodate an extra cost that you've put on them to pay for the increase in your education budget.
What we're doing in the education budget, yes, increasing the funding, ensuring that there will be free school breakfasts. For the poorest children, they will get a free school breakfast and a free school lunch as well. You talk about, yes, I did say that I wanted to support and help those who are just about managing when I became Prime Minister. And that's what we will be doing in a whole variety of ways.
Also within the manifesto, you've repeated that pledge to bring immigration down to tens of thousands. Why would we trust you after 6 years of failure as Home Secretary on that issue?
Well, if you look at what happened to immigration when I was Home Secretary, we did start to bring the numbers down. Then they did start to go up again, and now the most recent figures, they started to come...
You could have cut the immigration from outside of the European Union, and those figures went up after 2013.
And some of the figures have started to come down again. What is important in immigration is that this is a constant. You have to keep working at this issue. What leaving the EU gives us is the ability for us to deal with and have rules for people coming from within the EU into the UK, as well as people from outside the EU.
Over the last 2 weeks, the country has witnessed shocking terrorist attacks, first in Manchester and then in the capital. Many have lost their lives, Many more were injured. Serious questions have been raised over security in this country and what is being done to protect us from such attacks.
It is time to say enough is enough.
We spoke to Theresa May again after Manchester, but just hours before the London Bridge attack, to find out what assurances she could give on our safety.
Prime Minister, thank you for speaking to us again. How can we trust you to protect our communities when under you as Home Secretary you saw cuts to the police which left us with nearly 20,000 fewer frontline officers?
If we look at what is happening in policing, as crime is changing, we need to ensure that policing is changing to respond to that crime. That's why what we've done in policing is set up the new National Crime Agency that is working on serious and organised crime. Within it, a national cybercrime unit. We're putting extra funding into the police to beef up their ability to deal with cybercrime.
The national lead on counter-terror policing, Mark Rowley, has said local neighbourhood police teams are critical to the flow of information from communities. If we're fighting terror on the ground in communities with homegrown terrorists, we need the police there as our eyes and ears, don't we?
What we need is the links with communities that ensure that information is fed through.
That's what the police are there to provide, aren't they? The frontline officers.
There are various people who are there to provide that. What we have done is ensured that counter-terrorism policing is being protected in terms of the funding for counter-terrorism policing. We're increasing the support for our 3 intelligence agencies.
But it's those in our communities that pick things up from the communities that are critical, surely, in the frontline fight.
So one of the strands, one of the key pillars is the prevent work. That's about a whole network of people who are out there working with communities, getting information from communities, but also working to prevent radicalisation of people within communities.
Other measures which were brought in under your watch as Home Secretary were temporary exclusion orders. It's estimated that around half of the 850 Brits who are thought to have travelled to Syria may have returned. How many times have those temporary exclusion orders now been used? Because they'd only been used once since 2015 on the latest figures.
Yes, and the point is that the temporary exclusion order was not the only power available to our police and security services.
How many times has it actually been used?
It has been used once since 2015.
Just once?
But the point about the temporary exclusion order is that it is an additional power for our police to use when they believe it is operationally right to do so. So for some of those people returning from abroad, if they've been involved in terrorist activity, if there's evidence for prosecution, they will be prosecuted. It is for the police and our security services to identify on that case-by-case basis what is the right action to take in relation to any individual. And believe you me, when we can prosecute, they do.
Let's have a look at the figures. 20,000 suspects known to the security services, 3,000 on MI5's watch list, 500 active investigations into plots underway. Isn't the reality that our security services, whatever funding you have provided to them, are simply overwhelmed by these numbers?
No, the security services do an excellent job for us. They are working tirelessly to ensure that we can identify people who are of concern. What is important for government is that we not only ensure they have the resources they need, which we have done and continue to do, but they also have the powers that they need.
It's 16 years on since the so-called war on terror began, nearly. We're not winning this war, are we?
What we are doing is ensuring...
We're not winning it, are we?
What we are doing is ensuring that we are dealing with terrorism in the variety of ways necessary. Of course, we are taking action, and we join the international coalition to take action against ISIS in Syria and Iraq. But what we also do is ensure that we have resources put into preventing radicalisation. We want to enhance what we do there with our Commission for Countering Extremism, and that we're preparing so that if an attack takes place, as sadly we have seen recently, our emergency services and across government, we're able to respond to that.
Theresa May, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
I've been